So what is the most important evidence that can exist in a DUI case? That's what we're talking about today. And the answer is there can be a ton of really important evidence. I've seen DUI cases with stacks of evidence like this, even more so than some serious violent felony cases. Have, sometimes evidence like this, and you get a DUI, a normal run-of-the-mill DUI with evidence like that. It may surprise some people, but that's because there's so many different aspects to a DUI, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to determine someone's state of mind or the, physical state that they were in at the time, which can be a difficult thing to do. And that results in more evidence. So let's start from the beginning. Typically, an officer pulls somebody over. Now, they can already be stopped or asleep in their car. Obviously, it can result in a car accident and there's things. But typically, somebody gets pulled over, and there's a reason for it. And that reason's usually, not always, but usually documented with an officer's dash camera. That's at least the way we operate here. So there's a dash camera that perhaps catches a traffic violation. We're going to want to see that because that is the original basis for the stop. Other ones is a body-worn camera. Officer gets out of the car or shows up at a scene or whatever the case may be. Those officers these days, many of them have body-worn cameras. You've seen these. Really good, clear HD videos. Most of them are really big files. That's critical to this. That is going to catch the entire interaction. There's tons of little things that we're looking for in that body-worn camera when we represent somebody. Big files. There can be multiple officers on scene. We've got a DUI that I'm thinking of right now where there's like 3 squad cars, and it was a holiday, I think. So a lot of the officers were paired, like the whole force is on, right, on a holiday, right? And these officers are paired up in cars together. So there's 6 officers with body-worn cameras for this one DUI, this one traffic stop. And you bet we're going to go through all of those. So tons and tons of hours and hours of footage. Other piece of video evidence is the booking station video. So when they take them back to the police station, that's where they administer the breathalyzer or blood test or urine test or whatever. And there is cameras within that station that you bet we are going to request so we can see what happened. If there was a car accident, then you can bet that there are crash reports. On the low end, that's just a sort of form that the officer fills out. On the high end, an accident involving serious injury or death, there can be reconstructions of that accident, tons and tons of info. There can be what we call the black box. Modern cars these days have computer systems that are going to keep track of speed, braking, all those things, kind of like you've heard of in an airplane, right? The black box. There's that data that exists in cars. It's not always obtained, only in extreme circumstances, because you need technicians, you need expert witnesses to testify as to how that was obtained and what was in there. It's a big deal, but those do exist and are used in more serious accidents. Then there's just the normal things, like an officer's going to write a police report, supplemental report. That's what they do, right? They go back to the station, they write the reports. And that's a key piece of evidence, especially when we compare it to the videos. I cannot tell you how many times I've read a police report and I'm like, oh, that sounds bad. Our client's in real trouble. That's terrible. Then I watch the video and I'm like, what was that officer writing? He wrote that thing to sound so much worse than it actually was on video. So 2 very important pieces of evidence, those videos and then those written reports, and matching them up. That's going to be true in really any case. Many times with a DUI, people wind up going to the hospital, whether that's because there was an accident or you've just got somebody who's too intoxicated. These things happen. Overdose, people just asleep and an officer can't even wake them up. Unfortunately, we see those things. EMT gets called, people leave in the ambulance, and then there's going to be a whole extra set of evidence. That's going to be the medical reports. Oftentimes, that's going to include toxicology, blood tests. Most hospitals, if you come in there with a problem, most hospitals are going to say it was medically necessary to take blood. And then there is a result of that blood test. There is that blood that is drawn is screened for substances. And then that can become part of the evidence. Speaking of what is in somebody's system, well, that's a really key piece in a DUI case. So you're all familiar with breathalyzers, but breathalyzers have a report, right? That tells you what it was. There is logbooks, there are certifications of those breathalyzers, and you combat. Those are things that we're going to get and we're going to look for inaccuracies, inconsistencies, whatever you have. Many times a DUI case is going to hinge on the field sobriety tests. So there's an officer's police report. There's also a separate form typically that they fill out and they'll indicate where the clues were, where the clues of impairment were in those standard field sobriety tests. So there's some paper documentation as it relates to those standard field sobriety tests. But of course, we want to see the videos as well. And these days, it's almost always on video as well. And we're going to compare those things up, look for what's accurate, what's maybe inconsistent. And that many DUI cases turn entirely on those standard field sobriety tests. There can obviously be a whole lot of radio communications at the police, right? Somebody maybe calls 911 to report a suspected drunk driver. Officers obviously speak with dispatch and things. We can get that and review it, see, maybe why somebody or why an officer approached this person in the first place or what the story was. So that can be an important piece, especially when, maybe there's conflicting stories or people don't really remember what happened. That can be used to kind of set a timeline and an understanding of really how this all kicked off in the first place. One of the main witnesses is the officer, right, who made the arrest. But there can be other witnesses, especially in an accident, or if someone calls in a suspected drunk driver. You can think of a number of different scenarios where there may be a witness who, what they say in court is really going to matter here on this DUI case. So I talked a little bit about the accuracy of an officer's narrative of the arrest report. And they do. They free-form write, sentences and paragraphs about what they observed, what they did. And, that officer's obviously going to write that, in support of their case. They're the ones who decided to make an arrest. But that video doesn't always support what the officer wrote. So how does all this evidence get used? Well, obviously there's a million different ways, but it all goes to, can the prosecution prove their case? And oftentimes that becomes a lot harder for the prosecutor when the officer's narrative, their written arrest report, does not match exactly what is on video. And I don't mean exactly like small details. I mean like officers embellishing what happened. And that usually is centered around someone's level of intoxication. So think about this, right? Someone's charged with DUI. Say that they refused or there was no blood, breath, or urine test. So in court, the prosecutor cannot objectively show what is in this person's bloodstream. It's impossible. That was not done or it was refused at the time. So now they have to show other things, more subjective things, to show that this person was too intoxicated to safely operate a motor vehicle. And how do they do that? They're often going to do that by eliciting the officer's testimony in court, right? How intoxicated this person was, how they acted, how they smelled, how they had glassy eyes and slurred speech and an odor of alcohol, how they performed so poorly on the standard field sobriety test that obviously this officer made a logical, reasonable conclusion that this person was under the influence and unable to safely operate a motor vehicle. That's what the prosecutor wants this officer to testify to. First of all, the officer is terrible at testifying in court. Sometimes that happens. They become even more terrible when their written narrative, the words that they put on paper, the descriptions that they put, just don't match a video. We see that all too often, whether the officer was a little bit too gung-ho and embellishing or just really didn't make good observations. That is a great opportunity to use the evidence that we were provided against the prosecution, against the officer's own words. I got a lot of stories about times that we've been able to do that. There's something called the HGN test, horizontal gaze nystagmus, and the officer is required to do a certain number of passes. He has to keep his finger a certain distance away from the person's eyes. He has to do a certain number of passes, or else the test is simply not reliable. Well, the report certainly just says, well, yeah, I performed I administered the test and the person failed. But the video says that this officer did not come anywhere near giving proper instructions. He didn't come anywhere near performing the proper number of passes. He had flashing lights on in the background. Of course, that's going to affect someone's eyes if I ask you to look at flashing lights and follow my finger. The officer cut corners, but if you're going to try to convict someone of a criminal offense, you better do it the right way. The judge, we illustrated the differences, right, between what the officer wrote and what we actually saw in video. This was a smart judge. We're in front of this judge a lot on DUI cases, and this did not take him long at all to say not guilty. And it's a testament to not only knowing how this is supposed to go, right, like knowing the guidebook, the officer's guidebook better than he does. But it also is really a testament to just how important that video evidence was in this case. So what's the takeaway here? Well, I don't expect everyone to be an expert in DUI evidence. It takes a lot of time and effort and energy to do that. But you sure should hire a lawyer who is. I see way too many lawyers on DUI cases who also do real estate and divorces and all these other things. How can they possibly be an expert when it comes to all the mountain of evidence that we've talked about? They can't. So if you are facing a DUI, your number one goal is to find and hire that lawyer who is the expert, who does know about DUI. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about the different types of evidence and all the other aspects of a DUI case, we have tons of articles and videos for you to reference. If you wish to talk to our law firm, we'd be happy to provide you a consultation. Just reach out. Thanks.